Welcome to Uncharted Entrepreneurship, the show that brings you stories of trailblazing entrepreneurs. Get inside access to the minds of founders, partners, and visionaries. See how they find opportunity in challenges and take bold risks. They think big, act boldly, and make a real difference. Learn how they're shaping the future and making the world a better place. Get inspired to take action, believe in yourself, and ignite your own journey. Make your mark. Sponsored by EO Minnesota. Uncharted Entrepreneurship is a production of Content Basis, LLC. Copyright 2024. Subscribe and download today wherever you listen to podcasts.
Welcome to this episode. Today I have Alejandro Salazar. He is the best-selling author of the Emergent Strategy and managing director of strategy firm Breakthrough. Alejandro, go ahead, do an introduction for yourselves, much better than I just did. Tell us your day-to-day role and one of your passions in life.
Thanks, Brent. Thanks for having me, your podcast. I guess I've been a consultant all my life. I never wanted to be like what they say in the real sector. I've always been a consultant, strategy consultant, mostly Latin America. I started my career in the US. And over time, I developed philosophy, which was very successful. And, I guess 20, 25 years into the road, people asked me to, why don't you write it? I did around the time of the pandemic, right before it. I never thought I was going to sell much. I did it just out of, just to make the statement and to live, even to facilitate the training of my consultants. And it turned out to be a huge success. It turned out to be a huge success. Let me it turned out to be a huge success and a best-selling book in Colombia, for Colombia's standards, it just went above the charts. It's doing the right, also the same type of track in Latin America, and I decided to translate it into English. I'm entering the U.S. market, the big market. Today I tell you that I'm still a consultant. I do a lot of podcasting with people like you. I travel a lot. Hobbies, I tend to be a boring guy. I like walking a lot. We have very, very good, very pristine ecosystems to walk around in Colombia and in general in Latin America. I do some traveling, and other than that, I just spend time with my kids. I have 4, and that's about life. I spend time in the U.S., in Mexico, Dominican Republic, and mostly in Colombia, throughout the major cities. That's kind of my life in a nutshell.
That's great. Yeah, I spent a lot of time in Mexico, and I find that Dominican Republic is the hardest to understand for me for Spanish. They speak very fast, and they have a very Spanglish version of Spanish, and now my Spanish is terrible. So, but anyways, yes, good. So before we get started on content, you have volunteered to be part of the Free Joke Project.
Okay. Yes.
I'm going to tell you a joke, and all you have to do is give me a rating 1 through 5.
Great. Go ahead.
And I have a topical joke that's relevant for today. So here we go. If laziness was an Olympic sport, I would come in 4th just so I wouldn't have to walk up to the podium.
That's good. I'd say that's a 4 for me.
Okay, good. Thank you.
I liked it. So you wouldn't even make the bronze medal. That's good.
Exactly, because I'm too lazy.
Yeah.
All right. So today we're gonna talk about strategy. I feel like that strategy is often one thing that a lot of businesses overlook or don't even do. And we kind of started off with there's a bunch of frameworks that you can do to put your business together to help you in their day-to-day, sort of things that help you for punch card items to make sure that things have happened. There's trailing KPIs and forward-looking ones. Strategy is one that is forward-looking that people often don't do or miss. And I think one of the things that you have said that it's dying. So tell us a little bit about the background and why you're so passionate about this.
I think you're right in your general diagnosis. I think strategy is a totally misunderstood word, misrepresented, mispracticed for sure. And I think the whole thing started with the the really bad idea. And I think the really bad idea that captured the imagination and I guess the practice of so many years, so many people was strategic planning. The first bad idea was the idea that most people tend to confuse and to associate a strategy with a strategic plan. And I think that's the origin of the problems. Obviously, that has led to a huge industry of which a lot of people benefit: consultants, technology providers, internal offices, planning offices. But I think that's the origin of the bad idea. So for you to have any chance to solve the conundrum, the first thing you need to kill is that idea. Strategy is not a plan, and strategic planning is a little bit of an oxymoron. It's a contradiction in terms. You can't plan strategy. I guess why am I so passionate about it? Because my life was about becoming aware of that, understanding that in my practice. Even from the very beginnings, I was very lucky to be in certain points in my career with certain guys that all of them in different ways started the demolition. I think what I did was to actually, and a lot of people, for the last, maybe 20 years, 15 years, already knew that strategic planning was a zombie. And people started using the word strategy instead. But unfortunately, a lot of people that say, okay, I don't do plans, I do strategy, still are captured in a planning paradigm. So that's really the bad idea. That's the origin. I think it goes back to, the last 70 years. It goes back to, when the Americans, came back from the World War II with the practices, the military practices, and they spread over the American industry. Then through the era of Japan, when the Japanese paranoia, back when I went to school, I went to grad school in the US back in those times. And so all that mixing and blending of total quality plus the heritage of the Second World War planning, remember we just watched the movie, the Alamo and all those things, they were theoretically plans. And so the whole thing became mainstream. And so it's an ether where a lot of people are there without being aware of it. So that was kind of the story of my life. I became a parent as I practiced it, and at some point I think my contribution was that a lot of people knew that the thing didn't work, that the king was naked. A lot of people pointed to the philosophical criticism of it, but nobody had really, from what I know, and that's what I decided to, I wrote an ambitious book to go into every language. Okay, if strategic planning doesn't work, then how do you practice the other stuff? What is the other stuff? And how do you practice it? How do you take it concrete? And that's the idea, The idea is I devise a theory, not a methodology, so that you can practice strategy without the need of the word plan. And to do so, you have to do it, with a philosophical compact that I would call the emergent approach. So that's it. And I wanted to do a theory. I still remember an old quote by Gary Hamel, famous management thinker, who used to say that, he used to say the problem with the strategy is that there's no theory for what a strategy is and how should it be practiced. I think that's what I did. I stayed in my principles. I set some principles, not steps or methods. And, it's captured the imagination of a lot of people, down here, and I'm sure it will capture the imagination of a lot of people up there because, I don't think strategy has anything to do with culture or language.
Yeah, so let's unpack that. You mentioned earlier that there's a paradigm in strategic planning. Tell us a little bit about how that affects strategy and how there's a paradigm in there.
Yes. Yeah, there's a fundamental paradigm in the whole. Strategic planning comes from the general idea that the old plan, do, review type of thinking, which is the essence of the control mechanism. That's the way servo mechanisms work. That's the way control systems work. And they should work that way. The problem is that organizations aren't that way, don't function that way, and strategy is not for control purposes. So the whole mixture that's the origin of the bad idea. once you take that paradigm in, so people, once you say, I have to do a plan before I do. Remember, plan to review. What authorizes the do is a plan, which then you review. That's the origin of the bad idea, because it's actually the other way around. The way it works in biological systems, in the biosphere, in the econosphere, is the other way around. You do. First, you do everything. I'm sure that your life is based on doing. What got you here is what you did, not what you declared, planned, or so the doing goes neglected so the origin. So in strategic planning, the doing goes after the planning, and even after the reviewing. In that very, and it's a cycle of unconsciousness. In a strategy, you start, and that's the first principle of my theory, is a strategy is what you do. Strategy is what you've been doing. That's the origin of a strategy. If your strategy, reflection, exercise, intention, whatever, doesn't start off there, then it started in the wrong path, and it will take you nowhere. So that's the essence of the thing. Don't finish by doing, start with the doing. And interestingly, that is very powerful, because the world, you as a person, your organization, companies, you clash with the market. All the market cares is what you did, not what you thought, declared, aspired, intent, but what you did. So the feedback you get from the market is through your doing. So the emerging approach starts there. Is the other way around. The first principle is strategy is, strategy does. Be a little bit like Forrest Gump. Strategy is, strategy does. Start there. And that's very interesting, because when you look at the exercises that, everybody does, from humble, offshoots to huge companies, they start with the plan, do, review type of thinking. And when you enter that path, you start platonizing, you start intellectualizing, you start aspiring. Most of the time, you end up trying to do what's fashionable, trying to do what your competitor is doing, or the company that is fashionable is doing. And that actually explains part of the problem as to why the thing doesn't work, which is that it promotes convergence. And at the level of strategy, the worst thing that can happen to you is convergence. In a strategy, the worst news you can get is that you're alike your competitor. So, the philosophical process, so when people started noticing, people like Mike Porter in the 90s, who was, founder of Monitor, a firm where I worked, when he, came with the first, I guess, demolishing critique that strategy was about being unique, not better. And he posited this beautiful theory. Strategy is uniqueness, and the cost of uniqueness is choice. Therefore, strategy is hard choice. That'll be another one of my principles. But interestingly, you can't do really that. If you do that on a platonic way, you still fail. You need to understand that the market has you alive, and you have a right to do whatever exercise you're doing, because you're unique enough. So start off there. When you don't do that, it's very hard to even practice that. Mired in the noise, in the pressure, in the trends. So actually, I think that Porter he actually diagnosed the problem, and he coined the concept competitive convergence. And he said that's the disease of strategy. Yeah, that's the disease of what a strategy is, of the what is strategy. His paper was called What is Strategy? But it's originated in the how-to of the strategy. If you start in a planning mode, most likely you will end up converging.
Yeah, so you mentioned earlier emergent strategy. Tell us how that differs from planning strategy.
It's fundamental. Emergent strategy starts, and it's actually a beautiful synthesis. Remember, it's obvious that you work in the two worlds. Over the last years, there used to be this idea that startups worked by pivoting and hacking, and the incumbent established companies still did plans. I actually think that if you need two theories to explain the same phenomenon, then both theories are wrong. So emergence means that in a huge company or in a startup, the origin of strategy is doing. That, validates the insight of the, lean startup people, and you start have, I think they get carried away with it and lose their path a little bit. But the origin, what you're doing, and what the world is telling you about what you're doing, with the fundamental feedback the world has for that, which is cash. The only important feedback. The market, the market is blind, neutral. When it sees value, gives you back cash. When it doesn't see value, takes away the cash. Actually, in a way to scale or inhibit growth. So when you start, when you start by doing, and remember, the emergent strategy is an exercise of mindfulness. When you start to have mindfulness, because a lot of people don't know what they're doing, you'd be surprised that sometimes you talk to CEOs and they don't really know what their company is doing. So when you start there, you get a very real, concrete, actionable feedback. Interestingly, that feedback, and that's the rest of my theory, we'll talk about it, may not coincide with what you thought or wanted. But when you start with something real. When you start with a plan hasn't clashed with the market. That's why the old insights of all military guys that I remember reading a quote by von Moltke, the Prussian general, who used to say that a plan doesn't resist the contact with the enemy. So plans are fragile. To use Taleb's lingo, plans are fragile. There are so many ways in which they won't go as you planned. It will fragilize your organization. Whereas when you reflect upon what you're doing and what the market is doing, that thing is no longer fragile. That thing happened for a reason. You may not understand it. You may not like it. And that's where the real process starts. So I guess you're basically comparing reality with Platonic theory. I think, that's I think the reason why. I mean, you must have heard it many times. Strategic plans have two ways of failing. 99% of the plans fail for two reasons. Many people say that the plan wasn't good. A lot of people say something even more cruel, that the plan was good, but it was badly implemented. At the end, it's the same thing. The idea of planning, the idea that some guys make a plan for others to execute, the idea that you plan and then you implement, all those ideas implicit are bad. The industry around it is a farce. It's an industry where if you measure those things by their actual effectiveness in all those budgets. So that was the whole idea. And what I did was, the central thesis of my theory was, for you to get to the what of a strategy. If a strategy is choice, and really hard choice, strategy is hard choice. It's being able to do things and organize in ways no other would have done it before. And for that, you have payoffs and trade-offs. Choice, real choice. If that's the what of a strategy, then how is the how of a strategy? And what I, came up with, and the center of my theory is, the only way for an organization to get to a hard choice is through a process of starting with the doing, getting some mindfulness of what the market is telling you. You may not like it. Therefore, it's going to be a discovery process. You will have to break paradigms. Nobody likes to break paradigms. And that thing will eventually give you the courage to exercise a hard choice. That's kind of the general theory. So for you to get to a hard choice, you cannot be recommended a hard choice. You cannot plan a hard choice. You cannot say, look, I think in 5 years I'm going to divorce. No, you face choices. You eventually make those choices. They're going to be agonizing choices, difficult choices. You're choosing between things that appear to be good, all of them. And that process, if you really want to get to the what, you need to do it through an emergent process. So the essence of my theory is that I also think that once I kill your plan, what I give you in exchange, I say, strategy is not a plan. Then what is it? My proposal is, strategy is a trinity, meaning undivisible, set of three things. A strategy is what you do. We've talked about it. A strategy is as a box of paradigms that any organization has, which explain a lot more what you do than the things you plan. Remember, people act upon beliefs, organizations too. So a set of paradigms, I call that the theory of the business or the theory of the world. That explains. And the third one, and the bond between those two is, and this is even, it's also subtle, a strategy is how you are organized. Strategy is not something an organization does. So it doesn't live outside the organization. A strategy is how you are organized. Biology. The biological strategy of a species is how the species is organized. So those three things are indivisible. You cannot say, okay, I like the doing and let the other one. And the three things co-mutate, co-evolve, and the choice process exists at the heart of that. So what I'm saying is, look, the choice starts with a breakthrough in your theory of the business. You discover suddenly that the market you thought was so attractive wasn't. You discovered that the sexiest technology you invested in was not the sexiest technology. You discovered that your relevant competitor wasn't the guy you were tracking, or by the way, that you shouldn't be tracking any competitor. You discover things, and remember, nobody likes to discover those things. That's what I call a breakthrough. A breakthrough precedes a hard choice. And then the hard choice, the closing of the loop, why is it so hard? Why are choices hard? What are the choices that are hard? They are mutations in the way you're organized. So whenever people tell you, no, I did this hard choice, but the hard choice didn't entail any real mutation in the organization, that's bullshit. They're deceiving themselves. So I learned in my life that hard choices, and CEOs and management teams, avoid hard choices and rather stay doing plans, intellectualizing aspirations, because hard choices are mutations in the organization. And, I don't think anybody likes to mutate by fun or by hobby. Once you mutate the organization through a hard choice, my theory explains that, that organization becomes more coherent to the world where you got the breakthrough. So you become more coherent. What is coherent? Very simply, when you're more coherent with the world, you get more cash. The fundamental feedback, the only feedback that the market has, which is very beautiful, because that's actually the way market economies. I actually used to reflect upon why is it that we in the Western world criticize centrally planned economies so much, but then have no problem in centrally planned companies. So a strategy is a fundamental process of capitalism, is emergent, is unplannable, which doesn't mean that it's not understandable, that it doesn't mean that it's purely empirical. You have to make an effort, and the other, I guess, big corollary is that there's no strategist in my story. The idea of a super CEO who's a genius, and he sees things that other people don't see and get other guys to do his, it's more, the strategist in my story is a collective intelligence that comes from the organization, because for anything to emerge has to exist on a tacit way. So my theory, what says is, if you have a company that is alive, don't do this with business plans. With business plans, just go and do something and learn. But if you have an organization that is alive, I'm totally sure that the organization knows a lot of things that is not aware it knows, that are critical for the explanation of its being alive. That's kind of so I always tell my consultants, look, anybody who can hire us is already very successful, and the most successful in a biological sense. So start off there. So start with the organization, start with the collective intelligence, start with the doing, read, and all that I'm telling you, all those things are totally neglected in the world of Platonic strategic planning. Fashion, trends, paranoia. Every 10 years there's a paranoia. Now we're in the AI paranoia. We used to be in the mobility paranoia. Before that, in the ERP paranoia. Before that, back in, I don't know if you were around at those eras, in the total quality management paranoia, Japan's paranoia, China paranoia, California paranoia. So when you have your thinking, the paranoia in the world, you cannot. Strategy comes from an American friend. He tells me that by the law of unintended outcomes, I ended up putting together a theory that was Western in its whats, and a little bit Eastern in its house. which I think is a good approach. But I didn't mean it, by the way. So I had a plan. I didn't have a plan. That's kind of my I guess my general view, Brent. I set 8 principles, which my claim is, if you practice those principles and you haven't read my book, then you're an emergent strategy and you don't have to read it. And if you have read the book 5 times and don't practice those 8 principles, then you're playing with yourself. That's kind of the.
Can you list the 8 principles in the next 3 minutes?
Yes. So a strategy is what you do. A strategy comes from a breakthrough. The origin of a strategy is a breakthrough that you can only come to through reflecting upon your doing. Once you have a fundamental breakthrough, like in science, the third one is strategy is learning. You have a breakthrough is a domino that kind of changes your theory of the business. That's the third one, learning, discovery. The essence of strategy is learning. The fourth one is that thing is what gives you strategy choice. Don't try to make hard choices with the same learning you had before out of recommendations and trends. The fifth one is critical. Is strategy is about value, and value is the most misrepresented thing. I mean, value is the currency of which strategy is all about, and it's been abused. Financiers have one way of saying it, marketeers other one. There's only one, and I actually posited a very cogent definition of value. Value is that thing that is simultaneously relevant and distinct. Strategy this is very American, but not very Latin American. So it's a principle, and it happens in all cultures. A strategy is about winning, not playing. Many times you do strategic plans to catch up, to match, to tie. Winning. So it's very fundamentally, and that's the whole mantra of Roger Martin: play to win. Because a lot of the time, people play to play. A strategy is about distinctive capabilities, building and accumulating, like the turtle in the Achilles versus the turtle, accumulating a set of distinctive capabilities. And finally, a strategy is organization. Those are the principles, and you will find them embedded. They're not a sequence. You're like Russian dolls. In all problems of strategy. So that's really, and actually my clients, that's what they do. We teach them how to practice those principles. We never try to enter and tell them, what to think, how to think and how to practice those principles. That's kind of I guess that's my confession.
So your book right now is in Spanish, as I understand. When will it be available in English?
Yeah, no, it's available in English. The Emergent Strategy, it's already, it's available in English. It's in Amazon, available all over the U.S., North America, Mexico. It's available in English and Spanish all over Latin America. My website, theemergentstrategy.com, and you can get there. A podcast, concepts, IP that we share with the world. I mean, and I am, crossing over. I mean, I am spending a good deal of my time bridging into the U.S. market. I mean, that's where I was originally from. I had the chance, the good luck in life of learning the fundamentals from the big ones. So that's it. It's there, and we have around our IP a lot of different models to engage people. From podcasting to boot camps to our actual consulting. We have a consultancy, a very successful consultancy in the countries that I told you about: Mexico, Dominican Republic, Colombia, Panama. I have a small base in Miami. All Latin Americans do. But that's the story. But the book, a client of mine told me, look, translating your book is continuous improvement. For me, continuous improvement is the opposite of a strategy. So he knew who he was talking to. He said to me, if you translate your book, that's continuous improvement. If you rewrite it in English, that's a choice, which is what I did. I mean, I didn't translate it. I rewrote it. Even the English book has some pieces that the Spanish book still hasn't got in it. I have to take them into the second edition. That's the story, Brent. So I hope that people can get a hold of the book and what people tell me, and I wrote the book. to get the chance for getting my ideas so that a lot of people could practice them, knowing that we are a small boutique, and even in my country I wasn't going to be serving anything larger than the 1% of the 1%.
That's great. So tell us, how can people get in touch with you?
Okay, through the website, theemergentstrategy.com. In my LinkedIn is actually the social network I use, Alejandro Salazar. My firm, the Emergent Strategy, leads to my consulting firm, Breakthrough. You can imagine that if I named my firm 25 years ago, before I named this thing the Emergent Strategy, the importance of the concept of breakthrough, of actually breaking paradigms. But I'd say mostly through LinkedIn. I have been using that platform as the platform to connect and to engage with the people that want to share ideas and help me build it. And it's very interesting. I mean, that old maxim that nobody reads the same book is so real. I mean, the feedback that I get and the perspectives and nuances and that I get from different readers is fascinating. I mean, I'm eventually right at 2 points.
That's perfect. I'll make sure we get all these in the show notes as links to get in touch with you.
Please,
Alejandro. Yeah, it's been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for being here today.
So you wanted to take a final thing, or I mean, you said you would ask me a.
Yeah, at the end of the podcast, I give everybody a chance to do a shameless plug about anything they want. What would you like to plug today?
Okay, oh man, that's interesting. Shameless. I tend to be a very authentic guy. I mean, maybe I'd like to talk about what's going on in Venezuela, our neighboring country. Very, I mean, in my authentic, non-politically correct view of that.
Go ahead, tell us.
Okay, no, I'm saying that I hope that our neighbors, I mean, Colombia and Venezuela have a common origin throughout many times, throughout times. They were, because of their oil riches, the richest country in Latin America. We were the poor brother, the poor neighbor. And they had this tragedy, this tremendous tragedy of which is this totalitarian cancer that got there. Was I guess Cuba on steroids, and I hope that we say in Spanish something, I don't know if the maxim exists in English. There's no evil or no bad thing can last for 100 years. So I'm glad that we're living through the last moments of that era, and that we're going to enter an era of prosperity. I actually believe that in the post-globalization world, we're going to have this North American, the North American diamond, like they call it, is going to be the most prosperous region of the world. If we all understand it emergently and make the choices to take it to the next level, Americans and the southernmost states of that diamond are Venezuela and Colombia. It's actually going to be a very interesting. So I'm so glad that this painful 25 years, this tragedy, social and human tragedy, appears to be coming to an end. I send my Venezuelan friends my best wishes that this thing ends, that they end it. I mean, nobody can end it for them but themselves, and that I hope that we will. Wait for them at the other side of the river to enter this and it has a lot of strategy. It's a discipline that applies to all human collectives, not only companies. Your life, teams. We just saw the Copa America in the U.S. And so Venezuela needs to play to win. Colombia needs to play to win. The U.S. needs to play to win. We all as a region could win. And that's a strategy challenge, and for strategy to reign, to dominate, we'll have to have a conversation, learning, breakthroughs. So that's I guess I'm so over the last 24 hours so focused on my Venezuelan friends and hoping that they can get rid of that shit and that stupid ideas. Seize the day and go for it. And they will be a wonderful partner and country to do business with and to prosper together. That's kind of I wanted to say that to my Venezuelan friends.
Yeah, that's good. I think you're surrounded. Ecuador is having some issues, and Bolivia is having a cash crisis right now, and
Yeah.
Evo Morales is back.
Yeah.
So you're surrounded by turmoil sometimes in
I mean,
Colombia.
we have the turmoil. Let me give you the, the sequel to it. I mean, the country that has the challenge now is Colombia. I mean, fortunately enough, Colombia has always been a country that gets, it's a little bit untimely. It is always the last in trends. We're so lucky that so lucky and so stupid simultaneously in being the last to join this stupid gang of socialist revolutions in Latin America based out of, oil or whatever. Ecuador, I think, overcame it. They're now coming. Bolivia, I mean, you visited Bolivia. Bolivia is in, but Venezuela, and in particularly Venezuela and Colombia are the Caribbean countries. This whole thing. Remember this whole problem, which has a lot to do with anti-Americanism. If you look at the speech of this guy, started in the Caribbean. Remember Cuba and Venezuela and Colombia are Caribbean countries. So I think we're in a battle for our prosperity. What happens in Venezuela affects Colombia. What happens in Colombia affects Venezuela. I think those two countries in this theory of the diamond I told you are very important. I think when you go to the south of South America, that's a different world. When you see trade patterns, for example, the countries to the south of Colombia, all of them, their largest trading partner is China. Colombia, and certainly Venezuela, if it were free, the largest trading partner would be the US. So that's the real region. So that's what I'm really, I mean, I'm seeing this thing emerge. And like in emergent strategy, once you see the thing emerge, it doesn't mean you sit quiet and smoke. It means that you catalyze that with hard choice. So I think we have a great era ahead of us. And it's very interesting. And that's what I'm,
Yeah, thank you, Alejandro Salazar. It's been a very interesting conversation, and thank you for the ending and for your shameless plug. That I'm happy that you have this passion, and I'm with you. We had an exchange student from Venezuela in the 1990s, and things were completely different then.
Yeah.
I appreciate your passion. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Brent. It's been a pleasure being in your podcast with your audience, getting to know you, knowing that you had some connections to Latin America. Next visit of yours has to be Colombia. And when you do, please call and, make sure you show you around.
Certainly. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Uncharted Entrepreneurship is a production of Content Basis, LLC. Copyright 2023. You can find more award-winning content at contentbasis.io. And that wraps up the latest edition of Uncharted Entrepreneurship. Bold tales from entrepreneurial trailblazers. I'm your host, Brent Peterson, signing off after an incredible fireside chat with one of our intrepid trailblazing guests. Their first-hand perspective on conquering the unexplored wilds of business is just a taste of the rare wisdom you'll discover from pioneering entrepreneurs on this show. I also invite you to join me each week for insider commentary on the startup scene and digital marketing landscape on my Talk Commerce podcast. You can find Talk Commerce wherever you download podcasts or go to talk-commerce.com. I'd be grateful if you left a review and rating for Uncharted Entrepreneurship to help more bold founders find their way to game-changing insights that empower ventures to transform communities. This is your host, Brent Peterson, signing off for now. I'll see you around the virtual campfire next episode as we embark on another adventure into the great entrepreneurial unknown.